Okay, we are live streaming and the meeting is being recorded. I'd like to make a motion to open the July 6th, 2023 New Paltz Town Board meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
And it is the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, I'd like to, we're gonna wait on 14, the last item on the agenda. So I'm just gonna, I guess we'll keep that one. Table it, right? We'll just pick that off the agenda for this one. And do you guys want to leave the ADU discussion on there or just push that off for another week?
I'm fine for waiting for Stacy, just because I think she wanted to chat
Okay,
about it.
so-
Yeah.
And so we'll take that off as well. Number, or we'll just leave it, we'll leave it on there. And we'll just table it. All in favor of the agenda
Aye.
or second?
I'll second it, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. Announcements, the Town of New Paltz Office of Community Wellness, along with the New Paltz Youth Program and Ulster Prevention Council are excited to announce the third annual New Paltz Community Picnic and Outdoor Movie Event. Community doubleheader will begin with a community picnic from 6:30 p.m. through 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, July 15th at Hasbrook Park, located at 15 Mohawk Ave in New Paltz. In the event we will have, in the event we have inclement weather, it'll take place the next day, Sunday, July 16th. Community picnic will have a free barbecue, music, activities for children, including a bounce house. Following the picnic and shortly after sunset, there'll be a community showing of the Super Mario Brothers movie. It's rated PG. Free popcorn and bottled water will be provided on a first come, first served basis. Community members are invited to attend one or both substance-free events. Bring your own lawn chairs, blankets, insect repellent, and it'll be fun. So that's my only announcement. If there are any others. And not is Mr. Henry's not here. We'll see if he shows up. We can interview him later. And with that, we can do the overlay presentation. So Emily Spencer's coming up and Ted Fink. And so just so the board kind of to give people the background, yeah, you guys can sit down here. When we were asked by the ENCB to do the critical environmental areas, one of the main comments was that we should actually do zoning instead of just saying something's an environmentally important area. And so we wrote a grant to the DEC, and DEC has this program called the 2021 to 2025 Hudson River Estuary Action Agenda. And the goal is to help local land use planners balance future growth with protection of priority lands and waters. And so we were given a grant with this program. And part of the grant, we were to get legal assistance from Emily Svensson of Gordon and Svensson LLP and planning assistance from Ted Fink of Green Plan. Ted helped us with the community preservation plan. And it's working out great. And then Gretchen Stevens as well. She's the director of Biodiversity Resources Center at and Community President at Hudsonia. And we also got technical assistance from Christine Vanderlyn and Laura Haiti at DEC. And then the committee that was put together, and there's stay. Christina Beadle, we put a committee together of people that are on different boards in the town. And so Christina Beadle from the ENCB, Lynn Bowdery from CWASP, Rob Ferry from the ENCB, Amanda Gata, who was on the planning board, and Carol Lee from the Community Preservation Committee. So that group worked with Emily and Ted and the other people I mentioned for almost a year now, right? But it was really intense last summer and fall. And now there's a presentation about what we came up with, and I'll hand it over to Emily and Ted. So, and they can share the screen and kind of bring everyone up to speed with what we're doing or what came out of that project. Oh, let me make sure.
There we go.
Okay, good. The mic is on.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks for having us here. My name is Emily Spencer and Ted Fink. And yeah, so we wanted to go through, as Neil said, what the committee came up with. And of course, it's for your consideration. You're the board, so it's up to you, but we'll tell you what we came up with. And also just to let you know, we are available to continue assisting with a round of revisions on this and help you move it forward if you want to. That's all through the estuary grant. So again, this is it was funded through a grant from Cornell University and the DEC Hudson River Estuary Program. Through that program, they assist municipalities with conservation, and they really felt that overlay districts were an underutilized tool and wanted to expand their use. And so our contract was to research and produce the guide that's shown there, that's available online, and also do some training programs, which are also available online, and then work with a municipality. And New Paltz was chosen because you guys have really done all the work to do, to lay the groundwork and be ready to put the zoning into place. So just to explain what overlay zoning is, I'm sure you know what regular zoning is. You have zoning districts, and in each district you have different types of land uses that are allowed in those areas, and you have different rules for how they're developed. An overlay district sits on top of the regular zoning districts. So in that example on the screen, you can see you might have a district for residential, one for office, one for commercial, and you have a stream running through all of them. And you don't want to change the underlying uses that are allowed, but you want to have some extra protections where that stream exists so that you can protect the stream. So an overlay zone would lay on top of the regular districts and add some extra regulations for conservation purposes. Again, those are supervisor already mentioned the working group members, the all-star cast from New Paltz, and then some assistants from Cornell and Hudsonia. And so, the goals, the group talked about what it wanted to achieve with this. Obviously protect some of your precious natural resources. The idea was to try this out in one part of the town with the idea that it could be expanded to other areas in the future. We wanted to carry forward the planning that had already been done, including, the critical environmental area mapping. And we also, the group wanted to not detract from the housing needs of the community. So this influences the way sites are designed, but it does not detract from the number of houses that could be otherwise built, because I know housing is important. So some of the sources of information are listed there, and I'll just show a couple of them. So we started with this, the open space map. So we started focusing in on sort of the northeastern part of the town where the ridge has a lot of protection. And so we're looking at that northeastern part of the town where there's a lot of undeveloped land and important resources. So if you look at the green place there that's labeled North Woods, and then the blue that's Eastern Wetlands, that sort of started our thought process, like that sort of corner of the town, the northern part, and then stretching down through the Plutarch wetlands area, or is it the Swartikill, sorry, wetlands area, would form a kind of a key conservation area. Then also looking at this was mapping done by the Metropolitan Conservation Alliance of New Paltz and Lloyd, and the blobs 8, 9, and 10 are also, sort of form this area in the northeastern corner. Then further, we added some other mapping. This is matrix forests that were mapped by the New York State Natural Heritage Program. Yes. Program. And so that, you kind of start to see this area in the northeastern corner. It includes forests. So besides habitat, it's important for carbon sequestration. There's a groundwater aquifer there. There are farmland soils and scenic roads.
And so what we came up with is this green block. That's the group is proposing as the Northeastern Conservation Overlay Zone. You see it's sort of bounded by Route 32, then across Horsenden Road, down North and South Ohioville roads, and then going to the Esopus and Lloyd borders. And I want to thank Gretchen Stevens from Hudsonia for doing a lot of drafts of this. So she took all of those data sources and put them together, and then also kind of took out some of the already developed areas, because those obviously are not valuable for habitat if they're already developed. And so if people want to rebuild or reuse those lots, they wouldn't be influenced by the zoning. So I talked about what some of the protected resources are in that area: the forests, wetlands, streams. And the value of these habitats is really affected by their size and their undisturbed quality. And so the idea of this overlay is that if nothing is done, you could have this sort of death by 1,000 cuts, where, you know, so many different little projects going in carve that area up with a lot of, you know, buildings, driveways, roads, et cetera, and it loses its habitat value. So that's the idea, is to guide future development so that that doesn't happen. And the heart of it is really the conservation design process that Ted is going to talk about in a minute. So the basic regulated activities are things that mostly that would already go to the planning board: new commercial construction and subdivisions. And then we also included single family homes on parcels of 6 acres or more, thinking that homes on that large of a piece of land could have an impact on habitat quality. So they become regulated. And what's not regulated, anything under 6 acres of land, which just by doing that, we eliminated 40% of parcels from regulation without really affecting the quality of the regulation. So we thought that that would help folks who just have smaller plots and want to build on them. And then if a parcel is partially in the overlay, the owner would have the option of constructing it on the area that's not in the overlay, and they wouldn't have to deal with the overlay at all. So those are some of the things that are excluded. And the way the overlay would work is that, again, the uses that are allowed in the zoning do not change. So most of this is residentially zoned, but there are some commercially zoned areas. The uses that are allowed now would continue to be allowed under the overlay. The number of houses that could be built would not change. So if you had a number of acres that would allow you to build, you know, 10 homes, you could still build 10 homes, but they might be arranged differently on the land. What changes is the layout of the sites. And so the heart of it is this conservation design process, using resource priorities that are specific to the Northeastern Conservation Overlay, specific to the resources in that area. And then there's the final step is some impact reduction measures, like minimizing tree removal, minimizing stream disturbance, minimizing light pollution, that are specific to the area. So Ted, do you want to talk about the conservation design process?
Sure.
And, which I know you've used in other communities.
Yes, well, the idea here is to use the available enabling laws that New York State has for cluster subdivision, cluster development. Conservation subdivision is simply another way of designing a cluster development. And it was originally conceived back in, I think it was around the 1990s in Pennsylvania. A guy by the name of Russell Lorenz, he wrote a book called Rural by Design that you may or may not have heard of. But he was really one of the innovators of this particular form of cluster development. And
We're very
Kind of stay flat here, you know.
So the idea with conservation subdivision, it's a type of cluster development, all right, specific type. What happened with so much cluster development, especially the kind that we found here in the Hudson Valley, is that it got a bad name, because what happened was developers came in, they might have had a marginal site that had wetlands or a lot of steep slopes, and essentially they wanted to get all of the full density that was available to them, and any of the lands that were left over that they couldn't develop, they'd say, okay, that's gonna be your open space. So the idea with conservation subdivision is to be able to take advantage of not only those areas that are severely constrained, like steep slopes and wetlands, but also to take advantage of other amenities that may be on the property, such as cultural features, like an old farm that gets developed with a subdivision. To be able to protect those areas, to protect the stone walls, to protect lesser important resources. And that, of course, includes biodiversity, which is something that really was never considered years ago in cluster developments. And so back around more than 20 years ago in the town of Warwick, we prepared a whole new way of the town addressing subdivision development within a community that was right on the New Jersey border, where the demand for housing development was extreme back at that time. And so one of the things that the town did was to embrace the conservation subdivision design process, because they felt it was critically important to protect as much open space within the community as possible. And so essentially what the conservation subdivision design process, how it differs from a typical cluster development, is that it reverses the whole approach of designing the layout for the subdivision. Number one, and probably the most important thing to keep in mind, is that it is a density neutral process. So if you have an area where you've got 3 acre minimum lot size lots that could be subdivided from a larger parcel, doesn't change the overall density that the landowner potentially be entitled to. So if you have a 30 acre site, very simple, do the math, 10 lots is available. So with conservation subdivision, you still have 10 lots available, but you don't begin the process of laying out where those lots are going to go until you first go through a conservation analysis. You identify 2 different levels of resources: primary conservation areas and secondary conservation areas. And the primary areas, those are the areas that are the least buildable areas, like the steep slopes, like the wetlands, like the floodplains, the areas that I'd already mentioned. But the secondary conservation areas are also identified through the development of a map called a resource protection map. And essentially, if you're looking at this 4-step process, step 1 is simply to delineate those conservation areas. So if you have areas of highly productive prime farmland soils, those are areas that you want to put aside and say those are not developable. If you have areas of stream corridors, you want to protect that. You want to protect the riparian lands that exist, the upland habitats that exist along the stream corridor, to allow for wildlife movements, to allow for lands that are not going to be contributing to pollutants and sedimentation of the stream corridor and that sort of thing. Steep slopes, yes, but less severe steep slopes. So primary conservation area, the primary areas, those would be 25% slopes. The secondary conservation areas would be 15 to 25% slopes. So can be developed, but are less sensitive to development than 25% of greater slopes. So all of these areas are identified, your mature woodlands and so forth. And essentially the lands that are left over after you've identified those primary and secondary conservation areas are the developable areas. That's where you put the housing. So you want to go on to the next one. So step 2 is simply, and in fact, early on when we started to do this in Warwick, we went through a process, and it was the M&Ms process. We laid out the plans on a table. We had all of the resources identified, primary and secondary conservation areas. And then we had a little bag of M&Ms, and we used those to, okay, well, here are the development areas. Let's see how we can lay out the houses within those areas. So all of the houses are shown. Then, so you've got the buildings. Then the next thing is to align the buildings with your streets, your trails, access ways, alleys, if, you know, depending upon the circumstances and so forth. So you identify all of those areas as your third step. And then the fourth step is putting in the lot lines. These are the properties that people would be buying if they bought into this particular subdivision. And all of the rest of it is protected open space. And so this is a process in Warwick. They had a minimum 50% open space, but we actually had many developers coming in. The highest we had was 84% open space. Other communities that have gone with this same technique, town of Red Hook, where I've been the planner there for about 20 years. We put in place conservation subdivision design process. So those are the new subdivisions that happen in that town are also primarily conservation subdivision designs. The town of Rhinebeck. And what we did in the town of Rhinebeck, depending upon the zoning district, we created basically a sliding scale so that the areas with the largest minimum lot size within the town, we have what's called a historic preservation district. 20 acres is the minimum lot size. But with the conservation subdivision design process, the subdivision development would result in essentially 80% open space. That's the minimum amount of open space that you could have in a historic preservation district. Then the sliding scale goes, there's a 10-acre district, the rural countryside district. That is I believe it's 65% open space or 75% open space. And then there is other zoning districts, it's a 5-acre district where, you know, it goes lesser and lesser, like 65% or something like that. So it's, you know, it can be tailor-made to your particular zoning, so that it takes advantage of the opportunities that you have with the varying densities by districts within that area. I think it's mostly 3-acre zones that
Yeah.
are in
This is
that
mostly
area.
3 acres.
Yeah.
We don't have historic there, but I'll let you finish.
Sure, and the idea is obviously to provide sufficient land so that you can site a well and a septic system. Because, you know, for areas especially that are not sewered with community water and sewer, that's not necessarily an option unless you have sufficient density to make it economically viable to be able to develop for instance, a common septic system. And we've had some projects in Dutchess County where community septic systems have been developed. The county's health department generally don't like that kind of a situation. You're probably aware of that. But we also have a water and wastewater authority in Dutchess County, and they've been willing to take on the responsibility for managing common septic systems. And in that case, then the county health department is much more favorable to developing that. Otherwise, you're left with individual wells and septics. And, you know, unless you get over that 49 lot threshold, you're going to have to develop individual wells and septics, and you've got to have sufficient soils to be able to get that separation distance that's necessary. But it's been a highly successful program in Warwick. After it was introduced in 2001, virtually every subdivision that happened within the town was a conservation subdivision design. And so at one time, we had somewhere in the vicinity of 500 lots that were proposed as part of this conservation subdivision design. The way that it actually worked out is a little bit different, because Warwick went shortly after the conservation subdivision design process was put in place. Warwick decided they wanted to take the next step at protecting open space within the community. And they proposed a referendum to voters in the town to approve a $9.5 million bond act, to use the proceeds from that bond, if it was successful, to buy the development rights on farms that were remaining in the community. And because of this very agricultural intensive community, it passed overwhelmingly. And so the town began to use that money to leverage county, state, and federal money to purchase the development rights on farms. And the money was used up in a matter of years. And then Warwick proceeded to get state legislation to be able to have a community preservation program. and through the transfer tax and has been using that money ever since. So what happened was a lot of the big farms that had been proposed for development are still farms today. They were never developed because through those two processes, the referendum and then the community preservation plan, the town was able to achieve purchase of those farms, and they were able to remain as farms in the town. The farm got to protect its rural agricultural character, and everybody was happy. But they still have been doing.
I talked to the supervisor about, asked him how this overlay zoning has worked, and he had nothing but positive things to say about it in the town of Warrenton over the last 20 years. It just, and I don't want to interrupt, but
Yeah.
correct me if I were to describe this. So right now, what happens is if someone wants to just build a house on their property, it's as of right, they don't do seeker, they don't go before the planning board. And, it may not be today or tomorrow or next year or 5 years or 10 years, but eventually everything, more and more of it will get developed, right, as single family homes. So that's the death by 1,000 cuts. And no one ever takes a step back and looks at the bigger picture and how everything fits together,
Mhm.
especially these large intact ecosystems. And so as you cut up those large intact ecosystems, they're more vulnerable to climate change, they're more vulnerable to fires, and there's going to be more flooding because the wetlands aren't going to be there. The animals are not going to be as resilient when temperatures change and things like that. So there's everything then just kind of falls apart because you never kind of looked at it holistically at one point. And so if you never do that, then it's so in 50 years, it's oh my God, we have to protect it. You almost can't, it's done. It's you should have done it something like this before it was developed and before there were problems, before it's too late, right? And so what projects like this do, and even if, say, these were all cluster subdivisions and they all went before the planning board and they all went through seeker, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you know more about this than I do, it's okay, what's going to be the environmental impact of this development on this parcel? They never step back and say, well, what's the impact of this parcel on this nearby wetland or this nearby forest that's intact? And then this plot gets developed, that plot gets developed, and eventually it's well, what's the impact of this last one? It's already all ruined. There's no more real. So that gets a neg deck as well, because well, we've already ruined it. So well, what's the point? One more thing is not going to cause any problem. And so it's a recipe for disaster unless you kind of step back and look at things with each development over a certain size. How does this impact these large intact ecosystems, and can you preserve them? And eventually, that area is going to be more resilient with, changes in temperatures and flooding because you've preserved those wetlands and forested areas. And so it doesn't just help out that house, it helps out the whole area. In fact, the reason this site was chosen was because this is considered one of the more important environmental areas in the whole Hudson Valley, because it's the connection between, the Hudson River and the ridge. And so that's kind of my yeah. But if I got anything wrong, correct me.
No, you did great. The only thing really to add is that through the conservation subdivision design process, one of the things that I have submitted as part of the application for subdivision approval, in addition to that 4-step process, is also a site context plan. And this, is a good follow-up to what you're saying, Neil, because the site context plan, it looks at the broader area. So you've got the site here, but you've got to provide a map that shows all of the already protected lands, all of the areas that are potential for trail development, any sort of linkages that would be provided for biodiversity corridors. That has to be provided on that site context plan so that when you're devising the layout of a particular parcel of land for subdivision approval, you make sure that you don't intrude on those areas and that you have continuity from one site to another through those 1,000 cuts, that happen.
How often do you
over time.
hear, oh, I wish we'd thought of that back when this one was before the planning board?
Yep.
Right.
So I had
So-
a question about, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
quickly thinking about the overlay district. Totally understand it for the subdivisions, but let's say you've got a farm area
Mhm.
and a subdivision. Does that, and the overlay is over a river, that's just, for an example. Does that affect at all, say, somebody who's a farmer building a barn or somewhere for the horses that is close to the river? Or anything that allows them, I don't know, so
Yeah.
it's like, you know, I
think that's the-
understand, because there's
Yeah.
even animals have a lot of wear and tear, you know?
Absolutely,
We know, but at the same time, having rivers at your disposal is such a huge benefit when you have any kind of farm.
Yeah.
No question about it.
So does it make it so that, let's say you want to build, there's a cluster, but there's also a farm where there's lean-tos, where there's other buildings that are closer to some of these more protected areas, which I understand need to be protected, but I'm just curious how that
Yeah.
works out with
Yeah.
farming.
Exemption.
There is for
Mhm.
farming, yeah, I mean, so one thing that I think is unique about what we've put in place here is that it takes this conservation subdivision process and it does apply it to things besides subdivisions. It would apply it to a single home on a larger than 6 acre parcel, a commercial facility, whether that's, a regular retail or something, but it could also be a campground or, any type of thing like that. We do have some exemptions in here, and of course, any of these details would be up to the board to decide, but there is currently an exemption for agriculture conducted in accordance with ag and markets, sound agricultural practices, as well as forestry conducted consistent with timber harvesting guideline, so it doesn't stop people using their land in those ways.
Farming.
Right,
Farming. A lot of those resources are really beneficial towards irrigation, natural irrigation, drip irrigation. It's really nice to have them at your disposal without abusing the continuity of the streams or the water.
yeah,
But I think it's important to note that so that we encourage people to go back to farming,
Yeah.
to have that as an alternative.
yeah, and prime agricultural soils are one of the things that would be protected, so if, temporarily, if the land is being used for something else,
Mhm.
hopefully those soils would be protected for future
Right.
farm use,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just the last couple of things I had here, we sort of, let's see. We wanted to design a law that could be a building block both within New Paltz and also to be used as a model in other places. So you have, I won't go through the actual law, but you have it printed out. So it's 2 sections of code. One section establishes the Northeastern Conservation Overlay District. And then the second section is the conservation design process. So we made them 2 separate sections so that you could use these pieces in the future if you wanted to. For example, you could add other overlays for other parts of town and have them also refer to the conservation design process. You could use the conservation design process for other project types that aren't associated with an overlay. So they're separate sections so that they can be used modularly. And we also, hoped that this could be a model that other communities might be able to use as well. That's one of the outcomes of this contract we have with the estuary program, is to write up a case study from this for other communities to use. So you'll see that's kind of why it's designed in 2 parts that way. And I just also wanted to reiterate that we're available to work with you if you want to take this forward, if you want to do public comment and do another draft. And I'm sure the rest of the committee, some of whom are on the Zoom right now, will be happy to help with that.
Yeah, and we'll probably have, this is being recorded and live streamed, and so we'll have the planning board watch the presentation and see if they have any comments, but hopefully this addresses some of the concerns about they wanted more like straightforward zoning instead of just saying this is an important area.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and saying, oh, then you have to do seeker, because that was the concern, and hopefully this gets us closer to that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I like about this one, we talked about this a lot when we were doing this, in Warwick, they do biodiversity plans, is that right? Ours are based on like maps that are already in existence.
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and do this whole big study because someone's already put these maps together. And what we're saying is, we've all agreed we're gonna use maps, and it's not like, well, my consultant did this wetland study and your consultant did this wetland study, and then you're arguing about like, well, which one do you prefer? It's like, the maps already exist. So we're not gonna argue about the maps, and with we don't think your consultant did a good job. It's like, these are all male. So like, it's like, at least we're on the same, using the same language when we start the conversation, which I think gets things moving faster.
It does. I think it's an advantage for the landowners because that information is already there. That's one of the problems in the Warwick thing. They had not done a natural resources inventory, so they didn't have the level of detail that you have. And so anytime somebody wanted to propose something within the biodiversity conservation overlay district, they had to go out and hire ecologists to do the study.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, they have talked in Warwick about doing a natural resources inventory, and that would certainly make it easier for landowners, but you've got to, the leg up on it because it's already done.
That's what I have, but hopefully thank you for the presentation.
No, thank you
Appreciate it.
guys. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
And thanks to the committee, we had lots of long meetings and,
They worked hard.
yeah, and, I think people came to consensus for the most part, and, hopefully we can continue to talk about this as a board and maybe move it forward.
And I think if you are considering, I know we've done some of the seeker work already for this zoning amendment, if it were to be entertained, just to get the process started.
Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us.
I'll quickly say, I'm on Zoom. I'll quickly say thank you so much, Ted and Emily and all the committee members. I'm thrilled. I think this is terrific work and I really look forward to, helping.
Great.
This
All
is
right.
Julie.
Yeah, it sounded like you. Okay. Great. Thank you.
So, I'm not sure if you were here earlier, but the ADU discussion, Stacy wasn't able to make it tonight. And so, we're gonna just leave that on the agenda and we'll talk about it next time. We sent around the comments, again, Stacy's comments, but we'll hopefully in the next meeting, we'll talk about the ADUs. And so with that, like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Number 5 is we talking to different staff members. We have a tuition assistance program in the town. It was kind of vague and we didn't say like how many hours a week you had to work to qualify and what all the rules were. We'd like to do this, but the idea is we do it. We have some employees that we're hoping to get paid for the fall. And I think it would be unfair 2 weeks before they're submitting their applications for the fall semester to change the rules. But the goal is that we do this in January. But we vote on it now so everyone's clear what the rules are 6 months from now. And we're not surprising anyone at the last minute and changing the rules.
I'll second. Makes a lot of sense to me as written.
Any discussion?
I'm just wondering why December, they can't start in September like the full calendar year? Is there a reason?
It's for the semester.
It's for the semester.
Yeah, so, but this would be starting, because they've already started planning for September.
Mhm.
And I'm reluctant to suddenly change the rules now when they may not have saved money, they haven't applied for loans, and they're trying to go for apply for September, but they'll know that in January, it'll be different. These will be the rules.
Makes sense to me.
So I just have a question about, do we know how many people this affects that we're paying for now? Because if somebody got into, say, a program that's gonna be 2 years or something,
It's,
got into it knowing that we were reimbursing their tuition and they may not have been able to do it otherwise.
it's 3 and they're all doing it by the semester.
It's also 3,000 for the calendar year, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So might we want to consider waiting at least until the people who we've been paying for, because for instance, if they're in the middle of, say, their master's degree and they won't be able to finish now because they're not gonna get this same help and they relied on their detriment for this money, so this is oftentimes the reason why people take a job, because they have tuition reimbursement. So I would like us to consider at least continuing with the people who are getting it now, and then, so say if anybody starts new, we can start in January. But for the people who are getting the program already, that we at least continue to cover theirs as we have been
My,
until they finish.
my issue is that we have like, it's vague where, someone could be working 5 hours a week and technically they qualify for tuition reimbursement. And you're not really working for the town if you're working 5 hours a week. It was originally designed if people are working 20, 30, 40 hours a week, you paid for them to take classes instead of someone takes a part-time job, like in theory, all the lifeguards at the pool could say, oh, please pay for my summer class. And so it was never an issue before, but suddenly we realized like the wording was too vague before. But we could, if you want, we could do it for, I don't have a problem with that.
Can I make maybe a way we can kind of have both here? Do you want to just add some sunset language here that says that it goes into effect in 2024? And that there's a waiver period for a year, so if someone actually comes to us with that specific example, we could grant them the waiver and that's. Allow these other components that we want to go into place, so we're not punishing someone who is potentially in that scenario.
I agree with that. Yeah, my
And then we
concern was
deal
only
with-
what you said.
No, I agree with
Yeah.
you.
Was
Then we're
already
dealing it on case
planning
by
on it.
case.
Exactly, so if someone says like, that
Mhm.
was their plan, they've enrolled for this program for those purposes, we could reasonably, and I think we would as a group, allow them to do that.
I'm fine with that.
So
I just want
Like that
to
idea.
get something in writing and
Yes.
let people know ahead of time.
I like
But I agree that, so I'm fine with that. So the motion, Dan, was to,
So I guess the motion is, so it would be beginning in January 24. And I guess the language would be something to use to say. That through until January 2025, the town board can grant a waiver for employees who would like to. Who potentially don't meet these, I'm trying to think of the best
Okay.
language here, but I think the spirit of what I'm trying to say, I think we get.
Mhm.
But I guess for the purposes of the minute, they can appeal to the town board for a waiver for the policy
okay,
as established.
that sounds good.
I think I'll second that again if required.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, I appreciate so number 6 is motion to accept and approve the retirement of Sergeant Duke Bunce as a police officer from the town of New Paltz, effective July 23rd, 2023. And we have a letter here. He has been an employee with the town since 2002. And so first as a dispatcher, a part-time officer, was a sergeant. And we would like to thank him for his service.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we motion to accept the retirement of William Merton, mechanic at the highway department, as of June 20th, 2023. And also, again, thank you for your service. Probably fixed a lot of cars, saved us a lot of money. And
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve the hiring of Nicholas Newell at the union rate of mechanic in the highway department with a start date of July 24th, 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And motion to authorize community wellness department to advertise with Ethan Allen staffing to fill an open position.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And so number 10, we talked about this last time. This is the Housing Smart, the county's Housing Smart Initiative.
Mhm.
The goal of this is, we've all had presentations on this, people have been asking us to do this. The AD, well, so what you do is first you pass this resolution, then you join the program and you designate a Housing Smart Community Coordinator to serve as liaison between the Ulster County and the municipality. And then you this person then forms a task force, and then they go out and they do community education and try to get community support, and they work on getting grants and coming up with programs. Like they would have been taking the lead on the accessory dwelling unit law instead of me and Stacy. And so that's, we're eventually, I'm assuming we're always going to pass this anyway, I kind of thought the first thing they want you to do is pass the ADU law. And so hopefully we'll get the ADU law passed, and if people want to join up and join this task force and do the community outreach, that would be great.
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? And, we'll put it on the town's website, try to get people to join this task force. And it's gonna be a lot of work.
Yeah.
If you read through it, so hopefully someone steps up and joins.
Great.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, another, extend the contract with the rescue, for another quarter. We're still trying to see if we have any extra money, left over. But with the contract negotiations, we eat through a lot of the money that we had.
Mhm.
So, we're still looking, but hopefully, the motion would be to extend the contract for another, authorize me to sign the contract for another 3-month period.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And next two is,
That's it, library.
this is the library, and so someone emailed us, and just to kind of explain what this is.
Mhm.
The first one is a negative declaration saying that this is gonna have no negative impact on the environment. So, and it's a type 2 action, which means the DEC has said there is no impact on the environment, so we're just saying this is type 2 action, there's no impact for this, and that's the first resolution. The second resolution is the library went out and collected petitions and signatures from several hundred voters, registered voters, and then gave them to the town clerk, and the petition is will the town board, we've looked at them, they have enough votes, they have enough signatures. Our job is to say, yes, we received the petitions and we will put it on the ballot. We can't say, no, we will not put it on the ballot. We can only say the petitions were not valid, but they were
Yeah.
valid. So what we're doing is we're letting the voters decide if they want this to happen.
I'll second.
Mhm.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I signed the petition. So,
Appreciate that.
Yeah, the library is important.
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, it is.
I met
that's,
with them today, actually. They're really working hard on the possibility of a new campaign.
Yeah.
Working on expanding the library. They're being very proactive.
I agree.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it'll be on the ballot and the voters can decide, and hopefully they make the right choice.
Mhm.
The next one is our building department vehicle that you've seen it in the parking lot, the older one
Mhm.
was deemed unsafe.
Mhm.
It's cannot be driven anymore. And so we're getting rid of that.
Mhm.
But we've been putting money away in the budget every year since I think at least 2016.
Mhm.
And so we have about $30,000 saved up for a vehicle. So that one lasted long enough, and we were able to find one under a state bid for about $30,897.
That's a good
And
deal.
so it's a 2023, and so it's a really good deal.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
And perfect timing, we have enough, we don't have to come up with any more money. It'd be
I love it when
$100.
that works. I'll
I know.
second.
So all in favor?
Add one little thing to that.
Yeah.
If you can get, I didn't look at the warranty, if you can get an extended warranty,
Mhm.
I mean, 1,000, 12, 2,000, it's well worth the money.
Okay,
Mhm.
I don't know if it had, it's usually 3 years, you can get 7 years, whatever.
and number 14, we're gonna wait on that one. The cleaning contract, we'll talk about that at the next meeting. But.
I'd like the board to look at it,
Yeah, board look at it,
if any questions, please feel free to call.
Mhm.
and that's it.
Yeah, I read about it.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
I am taking the $20 donation.
Yes.
I put my $20 in here. This is for the HPC scholarship money. Julie asked